mitigating factors, and how can that be financed upfront to make sure that those disasters are then are converted from into more of a disturbance and destruction. The global and local financial institutions are required to play their due role in climate resilience infrastructure. There are two main challenges here for that. One is the fact that a country like Pakistan, which has serious constraints on the fiscal side as well as on the external account, we would be looking towards the international financial institutions to be coming forth and helping us out on meeting our climate compliance requirements. And also, there is an element of education as well. People are not aware. I am the first one to admit and raise my hand and say that, look, even on the green financing, while we talk about it, but we are very basic in our understanding of green financing is all about. We do not understand the complexities of all this climate compliance related infrastructure to be developed. And that's where the institutions like the UN and the World Bank, the Green Guarantee Company, they all should come forth and guide us on what needs to be done. Disaster risk financing is an essential prerequisite for SDGs also, as we all know. As I said earlier, the phrase that disasters are never natural. It actually turns out to be quite true in the sense that they are. There is an element of some uncertainty there, but if we do the risk management right, then perhaps we can take care of some kind of loss to be mitigated there, and then that translates into the infrastructure that we have to go in. There is a large responsibility on the commercial organizations, the private sector. They need to come forth and take the initiative that this is in their interest. The fact of the matter is that we can't. At times we expect that people are superhuman and there's always a personal interest somewhere. So you always need to tell them that there's a personal interest for them to put in this extra effort or money for their own interest. Frankly, with this disaster risk financing, the additional amount that they have to put in, they're actually buying an insurance for their future loss. I've talked about the external financing challenges which are out there for the Pakistan. We need to analyze in detail the risk transfer mechanisms by leveraging on emergency response cost or to ease the construction and rehabilitation processes. I sincerely hope that today's session shall help in coming out with structural reforms and policy recommendations for enhanced climate financing of climate resilient infrastructure. Thank you, Dr. Aslam.
Thank you so much, Zafar Saab. Rightly pointed out, and I think with this last single point on how we can look at the immediate priorities and policies and measures in climate financing and in the priority order in the respective fields, I think we would like to just move on to the panel discussion and get their insights and perspectives from their on their expertise on these issues. And I would like to begin with Madam Nasreen, in terms of you've been working on the insurance and risk financing of SDGs and been working, I think, in the agricultural insurance particularly. So how would you see Pakistan can offer agricultural insurance, which has essential position in handling disaster risks? Thank you very much. I think it will be
Ji, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Can you hear me? Ji. Before I begin, there is one thing which we all know but my apologies for repeating it. देखिए, एक तो disaster risk financing है, we need money for everything, all different segments of disaster, whether it is disaster risk reduction or it is disaster risk financing in insurance terminology or in post-disaster operations. But just to make this clear, you know, disaster risk management has three main pillars. One is disaster risk reduction. And of course, we try to reduce risk as much as possible. But all risk cannot be mitigated and reduced. Since risk is dynamic, and also because of climate change, it's difficult to predict what kind of risk, the severity and the frequency, etc. So all the residue risk, which is beyond the adaptive capability or capacity of even mature markets, that has to be transferred. And it has to be transferred through ex-ante insurance instruments to the international reinsurance and capital markets. And then, of course, these two being ex-ante instruments, DRR and DRF. And the successful execution of these two ex-ante instruments then is linked to the successful execution of post-disaster operations. Having said that, और जैसे आपने agriculture पे कहा है, देखिए मेरा अपना perspective, I've been working on disaster agriculture insurance instruments since over 12 years. My own perspective has changed completely since the last about 6-8 months, and especially after the 2022 floods. I mean, it's amazing to see, you know, that global agriculture insurance is being primarily driven by high-income countries. Number one, US, then China, followed by Japan. The onus has now shifted to the government. Public-private partnership की मैं खुद propose करती थी कि, you know, subsidies create dependencies, they create, you know, they suppress creativity and innovation and so on. But unfortunately, the agriculture sector is directly exposed. The direct exposure of agriculture to climate risks has made the risk systemic. The magnitude has become systemic. In other words, uninsurable without government subsidies and government protection. Even in highly mature markets, the three high-income countries I have mentioned, where the market infrastructure is very well established. Even there, the governments are giving premium subsidy, not only premium subsidy, but all kinds of subsidies having, you know, mera apna perspective change ho gaya. And talking about Pakistan, where the market infrastructure is dysfunctional or non-existent. You know, agriculture insurance cannot sustain itself in isolation. It's only one component in the entire value chain, starting from access to credit, to input costs, you know, to marketing, to warehousing, and to all of that. And therefore, in my opinion now, agriculture insurance has to be proactively supported by government. This is the, and especially because 90% of our farmer has been categorized as subsistence. That subsistence category has been defined by State Bank of Pakistan. Primarily, we can say that farmer who owns up to 12.5 acres is defined as subsistence. And therefore, this is my take on agriculture insurance, that the entire dynamic has changed. So is that enough? Okay, thank you.
Islam, if I may comment here. Excellent.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much.
What Naseem Sahib has just mentioned, we've actually experienced that personally here in Pakistan. So we did a pilot project for crop yield insurance, but the cost was so high that its sustenance became a big question mark. And without government support, it is just impossible to do it. And a country like Pakistan, you've already covered it very well. You know, I just want to share one statistic with everybody here. that, we have done a research and our estimate is that 46% of Pakistan's GDP is dependent directly and indirectly on agriculture. And if we can't take care of that particular piece, then, it's the disaster risk management will always be compromised. So thank you very much for this recommendation. We'll put that in the list of our recommendations from this panel today.
Thank you so much, Zafar Saab. With this, I would like to now turn to our speakers online. So, Mr. Sanjay, are you with us? Can you hear me?
Yes, madam. I'm here online.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining. So the question I have for you in terms of, we've just talked about the public sector role. So what do you think in your perspective and your experience, how we can bring the improvement in the public sector led funds, particularly to this disaster risk management, and what actions can be taken to ensure the disaster risk financing? Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you very much, madam. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, loud and clear, please.
Yes. Here on this part, I thought I should share some perspective from ISCAP's side. This is an analytical piece, and are you able to see my slides? Yeah.
Yes. I think
Yeah, okay. Thank you, madam. And
no, I'm sorry, we cannot see the slides. We can see the folder where you are trying to open the slides.
oh, okay, just
If
a
you could just
second.
open it. Yeah.
Okay. Is this fine, madam, now?
Yes, now we can see it. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much. I would like to respond from the public funding perspective of a very, I should say, spirited message that came from the chairperson, resilience by design in Pakistan, particularly from the public funding perspective. So in this brief presentation, I thought what could be done to build resilience by design in Pakistan context, particularly with the riskier climate days ahead. I just wanted to take a perspective of disaster risk financing in overall climate risk management, which came through all UNFCCC framework agreement, how countries are managing risk and how public funding or finance are allocated to manage climate risk. It has 5 windows. It started from the access to information on hazards to risk analytics, particularly which sector likely to be exposed the most from the future climate scenario, and that sector resilience building will be the key. And then risk-informed planning, which holds the key on having understood the risk, done the analytics on the people at risk, sector at risk, and then comes to the risk financing. So it's a chain. The 4th is financing that holds the key, how much budgetary allocation or the financial institutions should support the risk financing, and then the risk governance. So in this chain, if we take risk financing in Pakistan context, I would like to introduce, this is a ISCAP risk and resilience portal. We have customized this for Pakistan and exclusively to address resilience by design issues. Here, from this portal, there is a decision support tool of Pakistan, which gives you the risk hotspots in today's climate and also in the future climate scenario, what is called 4.5 representative concentration pathway, 8.5, which is the worst case climate scenario, 2 degree and above. So you see the hotspot in Pakistan context. So you know better, this is a context of the risk. And then you come to the impact, particularly the impact of its economic the economic implications of the risk. I think Mr. Chair has already highlighted some numbers from the World Bank, from the UNDRR publications. Our assessment more or less closer to that, and it was more from the disaster risk reduction perspective, that at present the GDP losses to Pakistan is 5.8%. In the worst climate scenario, that is 2 degrees, this will be 9.1% of country's GDP, which will be extremely difficult to manage. But then what could be done? What could be done is with the risk profile, we have developed adaptation profile for the country. And in the adaptation profile, if you invest in 5 key sectors, particularly making new infrastructure resilient, water infrastructure resilient, improving dryland agriculture. Pakistan case 46%, as Mr. Chair highlighted, contributes to agriculture directly or indirectly, as strengthening early warning system. So investment in 4 areas, and this also is reflected very well in SDG report of the Pakistan. You have a regression of climate action, which is matter of concern, then consumption, and also the infrastructure sector, SDG 13, SDG 12, SDG 11. So investment in 5 will help in building what is called resilience by design. So for resilience by design, it is important to understand 5 critical infrastructure that must be disaster resilient to avoid the cascading impact, supply chain disruption, the one which you have learned in a hard way, the recent floods and heat waves. So the energy, transport, water, ICT, social, which is housing, school, hospitals, all infrastructure. There is a, what is called, this is a ecosystem. These sectors are not a single system, but it's a network, which means that a local emergency could quickly spread and lead to severe disruptions. So these sectors need to be resilient, and that this intersectoral relationship we have to understand before investing in resilience of the sectors. I will just cite one example. It's very fresh in your mind with the recent experiences. The water infrastructure must be resilient for a country like Pakistan. With the agrarian economies, water plays such an important role, flood and droughts day after day. This water resilient infrastructure helps Pakistan in addressing water, energy, and food nexus. That's the nexus which helps to build resilience by design. Here, I will bring to your attention that infrastructure alone is responsible for 79% of the emission and 88% of the adaptation cost. And the new generation of the infrastructure has to be a gray and green. So investing in resilient infrastructure, and particularly water resilient infrastructure in Pakistan case, will help particularly to realize resilience by design concept. In the portal, we have done sub-national analysis. I will request colleagues who are interested to look at this customized version for Pakistan and which places resilient by design is more critical, more important, can be located. Those are some of the location-specific risks which has highlighted clearly. So my last point, from ISCAP side, we are customizing this. We will take forward the conclusion part of today's meeting, improve the quality of this portal. It will help in many of the upcoming activities, including National Adaptation Plan of Government of Pakistan, for future NDC, and so on. So this is all from my side. And thank you very much once again for giving this opportunity to UNISCAP, Mr. Chair, Madam, and thank you very much once again.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sanjay, for a very enlightening and revealing presentation. I have just one question for you. In the 5 sectors that you talked about, you haven't mentioned housing, the low-cost housing, because that seems to be in an area which is the basic necessity for the people who have suffered during these flooding or natural disasters. Any particular reason for that?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the social sector, what I have highlighted, I think housing is inbuilt into it. Is the housing, school, hospitals. Those all put
Just mentioned
together.
school and hospital and
Yeah.
school. Good.
Yes, and I think it's
Okay.
housing is a part. Right.
Perfect. Perfect. Because we have recently done a project. I was sharing it with Ms. Nasreen before the session started.
Right.
That we have tied up with Heritage Foundation, and we've recently done a project in Puno village in Sindh, Mirpur Khas, where we've developed these climate resistant, climate compliant and disaster resistant houses. These are basic cottages.
Right.
If the time permit, Dr. Islam, then I'll show you. It's a 4-minute documentary. We'll be happy to share. But I just wanted to gather all the thoughts so that, we will have concrete recommendations at the end.
For sure. We would definitely be playing that 4 minutes video. Thank you so much, Sanjay, for the great insights, especially in terms of giving us awareness about this portal that you have developed for Pakistan. Especially crucial to see where the hotspots are lies, where are the risks, the impacts, and what could be the better policy actions in the critical areas that you have also mentioned. And of course, Pakistan needs to really work on the National Adaptation Plan. So these are some of the key areas that I could take away from your presentation. Moving on, I would like to turn to Mr. Ehsan Tehseen from the World Bank, in terms of providing his perspective coming from the multilateral institutes and having experience of working with the government. What could be the national strategy for this disaster risk mitigation and planning? And looking at basically the adequate granularity to assess the growth of an efficient disaster risk funding approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hina. And first of all, at the outset, my congratulations to SDPI and the Bank of Punjab for organizing such an important session during this overall conference. Zafar Saab made a comment earlier that disasters are not natural. I fully agree, and there's actually, I hope I can share with you sometime after this conference, a very good analytical piece. And there's evidence to prove that hazards are natural, disasters are man-made. Sure. Disasters are always unnatural. And there's always some human element that successfully converts a hazard into a disaster. So I think it's a very good thing that we need to recognize. With this, with the overall theme of disaster risk financing and DRM, see, DRF cannot be seen in isolation. It is very much part of DRM. As Nasreen Saib also mentioned, that there are various elements into DRM. DRF is very much a critical part because in a standalone, it doesn't matter how much interventions or whatever we plan around DRF, it will not make any difference until we look at what the panelists have raised issues on resilient infrastructure, on better planning. Now, coming back to your question, we're very good at making plans. Pakistan has made a number of plans after the earthquake. Pretty much after the earthquake, the whole paradigm shift happened towards ex-ante risk management, where a number of institutions were set up, ERA, then NDMA. We had the National Disaster Management Plan, National Disaster Risk Policy, subsequently in 2010 and 2013. On climate, we've had a number of plans. We have policies, NDCs. But what we see is we don't really see the translation of these plans into action. A number of reasons for that. There is a lot of disconnect, between the federal and provincial sort of actors, and with DRM and climate also being a devolved subject now, a lot of this implementation needs to happen at the provincial level. But we don't really see that strong coordination or connection at the moment. There are issues with technical capacity, issues with financial resources to be able to implement those plans. Now, working backwards, what our colleague also said on, say, these 5 sectors, taking that as an example, working backwards from there, you mentioned about resilient and disaster resilient infrastructure, other sort of investments which need to be disaster resilient. But all of it comes to the core of it is actually planning, how good we are at planning these areas. And any plan is as good as the data that goes into it. There's a huge challenge with data availability on, whether it's fiscal risk, in the context of disaster risk financing, whether it's physical risk. NDMA has started an initiative, I think a few years back, where they are able to undertake multi-hazard and vulnerability risk assessments to really bring out that data on and understand how we can contribute to more resilient and risk-informed planning. That effort, I think, is ongoing, but our key policymakers and decision makers have not been able to sort of tap into it. So I think the crux, to answer your question, really the crux is how good your data is, how well informed we are. And this also relates to any sort of DRF instrument or any solution that we want to come up on risk financing, on building fiscal resilience. This is also crucial for that, to understand the fiscal risk, to understand the contingent liabilities of the government. And only then we can come up with better planning and better sort of strategies. I hope that answers.
Thank you so much, Ehsan. Now I would like to request Mr. Lasita Pereira, the Development Guarantee Group. He's online. Are you with us, sir?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So the question posed to you would be, what kind of measures do you think that can be undertaken for the efficient DRM activities, and what would be the policy guidelines that could be taken for the vulnerable groups? Can you hear
I'm
me?
sorry, I didn't catch the last part. What was the policy guideline?
It was the policy guidelines that could be taken for particularly the vulnerable groups of society.
Right. So I think I have to confess I'm not an expert in focusing on policies. So I'm gonna talk about those in the context of my main area of expertise, which is the capital markets. But what's clear from all the other experts on the panel is that what I fully agree with is you need to plan before you can go and raise the money. And in that regard, what we are trying to do here at the Development Guarantee Group is we're setting up what we're calling the Green Guarantee Company. And what we will do with that is essentially the Green Guarantee Company is looking at the equation from the opposite side. So a lot of the experts that are talking about what Pakistan can do internally, we're looking at how we can help Pakistan with raising funding externally. Now, obviously, if you think about the issue, and Dr. Abid mentioned in his opening remarks, that the DRF challenge for countries is $1 trillion challenge. And the reality is, even if you mobilized every dollar in developing countries that exist in their capital markets, you're not going to have enough money there to meet that gap. However, in global capital markets, it's over $100 trillion of assets there, but very little of that is coming into countries like Pakistan. And so our question is, why is that? From our perspective, it's a very much it's a psychology and a perception issue. It's inevitable that a lot of people sitting outside Pakistan look at the country and they see the risk as being much higher than the actual risk on the ground. And it's about trying to address that. And that's where we see guarantees coming in to help. Guarantee is very similar to insurance in so much as that it's looking to try and help challenge help to plan for the future by making people, making the cost of doing so more affordable. And that's the approach that we also want to take. So in that regard, we are looking to work with partners like the Bank of Punjab, and we're very grateful for the opportunity here to speak on this panel alongside all these distinguished panelists about the fact that actually, as I mentioned, without the participation of the global capital markets coming in as well, financing disaster relief going forward is going to be a big challenge. And while insurance is part of that, we also need to start thinking about how do we invest in all the gray and green infrastructure that Dr. Sanjay was talking about as well in his presentation. That funding needs to happen now, but it needs to happen on a long-term affordable basis. To give you an example of what I mean, WAPDA, as you know, issued a green bond into 2021. And it was issued a very successful green bond. It was issued with a coupon of 7.5% for a tenure of 10 years. Now, in current market conditions, if BAPDA went out, the implied cost of that bond in the market at the moment is over 20%, which is very unaffordable. So how can Pakistan invest in the infrastructure it needs to become more climate resilient and to fund its disasters? And this is where we see the opportunity for organizations like the Green Guarantee Company to use our guarantees, which will be investment grade, to help support raise longer term climate financing for that. So, with regards to going back to the question asked, from our perspective, one of the key things is while there are a lot of plans in place, what we need to now work on is on executing those plans into clear investment opportunities that we are able to communicate clearly to third-party investors outside Pakistan, with the benefit of things like guarantees, with the benefit of support from the MDBs as well, to try and create those investment opportunities and mobilize that over $100 trillion that's sitting there in these global capital markets. A lot of it is looking for places to go for a home to try and help come in. And that is where, from our perspective, a lot of the challenge lies at the moment. It fundamentally is a communication challenge. We need to be able to be helping Pakistan and other developing countries to be able to communicate more clearly with the global capital markets about the opportunity that exists in Pakistan to help it make it more resilient. Because clearly making it more resilient, as we've heard, there are a lot of economic costs, but we should also talk about the economic opportunities that exist in trying to make Pakistan more climate resilient. And that is something that I think is a key area that we should look at. Disaster risk management always seems to have a negative connotation to it, but as people have said, hazards are normal, but disasters are not. But fundamentally, that means that if by addressing what is not normal, we are actually creating opportunities, then we should also be focusing on explaining those as well. So I'm just going to stop there. As I said earlier, I'm not a disaster risk management policy expert, so I've tried to do the best I can within my field of expertise, which is, as I said, capital markets. But fundamentally, I hope I've given some food for thought on that.
Thank you so much. Yes,
Yeah.
Professor.
Dr. Aslam, in a way for me, Mr. Pereira has made the day because, we have been, advocating this for the last 3 days in this conference only, where we've been requesting for our, foreign partners to come and work with us, potential partners to come and work with us to raise funding from these capital market pockets that exist on green financing. So Mr. Pereira offering that to us, I think it's a big deal for Pakistan. And thank you very much for that, Pereira sir.
Thank you, Zahra Saab.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Pereira, and thank you so much, Zafar Saab, for your remarks. Talking about the capital markets for green financing to help the populations to be protected from the event of disasters. I think we would also like to hear some thoughts from Ahad on the social protection mechanisms that could be linked to these. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll apologize in advance that since I have a mechanical engineering background, so my talk might not be relevant to the environmentalist and economist sitting here. But these are some innovative things that we can do with regards to the disaster risk financing. And I'll just start off by saying that I think there is a structurally wrong assumption here that climate change is a risk. I think it is an issue and it should be dealt like an issue. This is it's actually happening right now. How can we start thinking of doing things in the long run? So the financing required to mitigate these disasters will be both in the short run and the long run. And of course, most of the comments that have been delivered today by the worthy panelists were focused on the long run, and they are highly appreciated. But some of the things that we can do in the short run to mitigate the impact, especially while we are talking about the vulnerable communities that are impacted by disasters. And I'm particularly talking about the climate change induced disasters. So number one, I think there is a concept that SDPI was part of. We actually started the policy narrative around social entrepreneurship. So I think this is something very important where the private sector can actually help mitigate many challenges that are faced with regards to the disaster. And of course, the financing for these social entrepreneurial ventures can come through microfinance as well as the community entrepreneurship programs through social protection. The number two idea, which I floated to some of the partners, but of course it is still being discussed, and we are trying to see what research we can do in this regard, is the idea of a social stock exchange. So while one of the worthy panelists was talking about the capital markets, I think capital markets can play a very important role in disaster risk financing. We will need some contingency money plus some money for the long-term adaptation and mitigation measures, and all this money can be actually collected through the CSR budget of all the corporates that we have. Those CSR budgets are, if they are formally channeled, and I would, of course, the model that we have in Singapore, we have in UK, they all involve the country's stock exchange in that. So based on an impact assessment of whatever that CSR budget is being used for, I think that can be a very important point if we can utilize that budget in the proper way. And the third and most important aspect that I would like to discuss is the community engagement component, which I think we are very, very behind in. I was recently working for a project with a group of US-based people. And during that project, we had a chance of meeting Dr. Elston, who is a community engagement specialist working in the tundra. So they have, of course, climate-related disaster issues in towards that part of USA. So they have created a set of community engagement specialists who are actually making the community realize what they can do for themselves. And last, of course, is I think we need to have a very strong grip on technology and data. Based on my own observation, of course, I didn't find anything from the literature there. We still have traces of disaster-led destruction of the 2005 earthquake still. So even 17 years after, if we have not been able to find or mitigate the issues of the population that was affected there, I think we really need to start working with the data, and modern technologies can enable us to help. And because my prime area where I deal with the private sector in SDPI, so and I have a request to make to all the private sector that I think we should consider the planet component of the triple bottom line as the most important component, because whatever we do it for our own social well-being and for the social well-being of the future generations. Thank you.
Professor, let me give good news to Dr. Ahad. The 5 constituencies that he talked about, we have worked on 3 of them. The 4th one is established, in infrastructure, which is the social stock exchange. Essentially, it's the carbon trading piece. So that has to be brought into Pakistan. But first, we have to have the projects in place, and then we go there. Technology and data, Dr. Sanjay has covered it really well. But on the other 3, microfinancing, in fact, I had put that as one of my recommendations here also, taking a cue from Nasreen Sahiba's earlier comment. and then community engagement, as well as the short-term plan. Can I request to, if you can play this video here? I'm sure Dr. Ahad will be very pleased to see what we have been able to achieve with Heritage Foundation on this front.
Sure, sir. Can we please request the IT team to play the video?
पाकिस्तान मौसमियाती तब्दीली के बायस अपनी तारीख के बदतरीन सैलाब से गुजर रहा है। इस तबाहकुन सैलाब ने लाखों अफराद को बेघर करके ऐसे इंसानी अलमिये को जन्म दिया है जिस पर हर आंख अश्क बार है। मुसीबत की इस घड़ी में दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब एक मर्तबा फिर समाजी जिम्मेदारी निभाने के लिए सरगर्म अमल और सरकर्दा किरदार अदा कर रहा है। सैलाब मुतासिरीन की मदद और बहाली के लिए दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब ने न सिर्फ अतियात जमा किए बल्कि अमली तौर पर इमदादी सरगर्मियों में हिस्सा लेने के लिए रजाकार प्रोग्राम BOP मददगार का आगाज किया। BOP मददगार प्रोग्राम के जरिए दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब के मुलाजमीन रजाकाराना बुनियाद पर इमदादी कामों में अमली तौर पर हिस्सा लेते हैं, जबकि बैंक रजाकारों की हौसला अफजाई के लिए जरूरी तरबियत और इमदादी सामान और दीगर सहूलियात फराहम करता है। रोजान शहर में सैलाब मुतासिरीन के लिए शेल्टर्स की तामीर से BOP मददगार प्रोग्राम के तहत सरगर्मियों का आगाज किया गया। सैलाब से मुतासर इलाकों में माहौल दोस्त मटीरियल के साथ मुस्तकिल मगर बुनियादी शेल्टर्स तामीर किए जा रहे हैं। मौसम और माहौल से मुताबिकत रखने वाले ये शेल्टर्स पायदार और सैलाब से मुकाबला करने की सलाहियत रखते हैं। ये शेल्टर्स न सिर्फ तामीर में आसान और इंतहाई कम लागत हैं, जीरो कार्बन फुटप्रिंट के हामिल ये शेल्टर माहौल दोस्त भी हैं। इन्हें खोलकर दोबारा से तामीर किया जा सकता है। दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब ने मुकामी अफराद को शेल्टर्स की तामीर की तरबियत भी फराहम की है, जिससे इन्हें रोजगार भी हासिल होगा। BOP की इमदादी सरगर्मियों का ये सिलसिला मुल्क के दीगर सूबों में भी जारी है। इस सिलसिले की एक और कड़ी मीरपुर खास सिंध के गांव पुन्नू में शेल्टर्स की तामीर। दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब ने तरक्याती कामों के लिए इस गांव को एडॉप्ट किया है।
आज हम सारे BOP की मददगार टीम BOP मददगार के प्रोग्राम के तहत पुन्नू कॉलोनी मीरपुर खास डिस्ट्रिक्ट पहुंची है और यहाँ पे हम अपना जो हमारे BOP का ऑलमोस्ट अडॉप्टेड विलेज पुन्नू है उसमें आज हम वॉलंटरी वर्क करने आए हैं और इसमें अभी तक हमारी टीम ने अपने हाथों से कच्ची ईंटें बनाई हैं और अब हम इस स्ट्रक्चर जो हमारे इर्द-गिर्द आप देख रहे हैं इसको बनाने की कुछ प्रैक्टिस करेंगे।
पुन्नू में माहौल दोस्त शेल्टर्स की तामीर का आगाज सैलाब से कबल ही कर दिया था। ये शेल्टर सैलाब के दौरान न सिर्फ कायम रहे बल्कि सैलाब मुतासिरीन को तहफ़्फ़ुज़ फराहम करने में भी कामयाब रहे। इसीलिए अब मुकामी अफराद इसको BOP गांव कहते हैं। मौसम की शिद्दत का मुकाबला करने के लिए माहौल दोस्त मटीरियल के साथ तामीरात के अलावा दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब ने इलाके में शजरकारी का सिलसिला भी शुरू किया है।
इस प्रोजेक्ट को जो BOP ने अडॉप्ट किया है उसको करीब से देखने का, इसमें पार्टिसिपेट करने का मौका मिला। यकीन माने खिलते चेहरों को देख के जो इनकी खुशी है हमें अपने अंदर अपने साथ मौजूद देख के हमारी थकावट खत्म हो गई। मेरे ख्याल में ये एक ऐसा प्रोजेक्ट है जिससे इस इलाके के इर्द गिर्द के लोगों को भी इससे इंस्पायर होके और ऐसे शेल्टर्स बनाने में मदद मिलेगी।
दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब की जानिब से जारी इन माहौल दोस्त तामीरात में मोहतरमा यास्मीन लारी और हेरिटेज फाउंडेशन ने तकनीकी मदद फराहम की। दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब मुल्क की तामीर और तरक्की और कॉर्पोरेट समाजी जिम्मेदारी निभाने के लिए हमेशा सरगर्म अमल रहा है और हर मुश्किल घड़ी में अपने बहन भाइयों की मदद के लिए पुरअज़्म है। दी बैंक ऑफ पंजाब रखे हर फर्द का ख्याल।
Thank you so much, Zafar Saab. I think incredible work being done by BOP. And I would like to add on that we recently have also worked on the climate smart housing from the technical perspective, and that's a research report that we would like to present to you later. It has some really a strong policy recommendations based on real challenges from the ground and case study approach. So perhaps this could also connect us through the implementation side and the technical side. Thank you so much for that. I would like to come back to Madam Nasreen in terms of if you would like to share some more thoughts on the disaster risk financing and insurance and the work that you're doing.
जी, thank you so much. जो मैंने पहले कहा था उसी में कुछ थोड़ा सा और ऐड करना चाहूंगी. On the positive side, Pakistan has a very comprehensive disaster risk management regulatory framework. As far as the three main pillars I was talking about, DRR, disaster risk reduction, is being actively undertaken by National Disaster Risk Management Fund. As far as post-disaster operations are concerned, that is the mandate which is being addressed by NDMA. जो तीसरा main component है DRF, वहाँ बहुत बड़ा वैक्यूम है. वहाँ क्यों वैक्यूम है कि पाकिस्तान की insurance penetration is one of the lowest in the world. At the moment, it's about 0.09% of the country's GDP. Just as an example, what mature insurance markets do and how they help to support the fiscal challenges of governments as an impact of natural disasters. 2012 में जब न्यूजीलैंड में बहुत बड़ा एक earthquake आया था, 80% of the total economic losses to the country were insured. As a result of this, only 20% fiscal impact was the burden suffered by the government. In contrast to that, 2010 के floods में only 1% losses were insured. अब इस DRF के component में बहुत अच्छे foundation building blocks ले कर रहा है UNDP और NDRMF. UNDP जिसके साथ मैं इस वक्त कंसल्ट कर रही हूँ, उन्होंने एक कंसल्टेटिव सेशन कंप्लीट कर लिया है with all provinces and regions, sensitizing them on what DRF means and what are the benefits of setting up X and DRF instruments in place before the disaster strikes. फिर उन्होंने एक diagnostic study भी complete की है कि DRF में कौन से gaps हैं, उसके क्या benefits हैं, क्या opportunities हैं और क्या challenges हैं. अब एक policy brief वो present करेंगे to all stakeholders, जिसमें major recommendations होंगी कि Government of Pakistan अपनी rising contingent liability as a result of growing and bulging vulnerable populations as well as being provider of food security, ये कैसे manage की जा सकती हैं. जहाँ तक strategy की आप बात कर रहे थे, NDRMF, with whom I am also consulting, we are in the process of developing a national disaster risk financing strategy with all stakeholders. इस strategy का क्या outcome होगा? It will lay a strategic roadmap कि कौन-कौन से stakeholders इसमें involve होंगे, उनके implementation plan क्या होगा, किसकी roles और responsibilities क्या होंगी और किस तरह से ये disasters जो insurance है वो agriculture, primarily small farmers, SMEs, households, vulnerable populations को कैसे address करेगी. Now coming back to why insurance penetration in Pakistan is one of the lowest in the world, one of the major stumbling blocks has been the lack of country-specific risk data. इसमें NDRMF ने सुपार्को को mandate दिया है, जो develop कर रहे हैं catastrophe risk modeling for floods, for earthquakes, for typhoons, cyclones, and so on. Now coming to my last point, क्योंकि जफर ने recommendations का कहा था, हमारी strong recommendation है, and if you review what I had said earlier, agriculture insurance cannot operate in isolation, especially in a country like Pakistan, where there is no market infrastructure, where 90% of the farmer is subsistence. तो agriculture हालांकि 18th amendment में delegate हुआ है subject, but if you look at the 18th amendment, it is still a shared jurisdiction. Yani ke food security or food exports is still the responsibility of the federal government, whereas all other areas pertaining to agriculture are the responsibility of the provinces. So therefore, जैसे Canada में है, it's a shared jurisdiction. So agriculture insurance pool on a national level or different pools on sub-national levels is the only answer, because government की जो ये दोनों major fiscal challenges हैं, vulnerable populations and food security, they are interlinked and interconnected. So with one instrument, which is agriculture insurance pools, both these major challenges, which are increasing the government's contingent liability, can be addressed adequately with only one instrument. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pam. I would like to now turn to the audience. If somebody has any question, please raise your hand. So we have a question over there. If somebody could please give the mic. Also, if you could suggest which, to whom would you like to make a question? On that side, please.
Thank you very much. Kacho Imtiaz Haider from Gilgit-Baltistan. I'm ex-member of Gilgit-Baltistan Assembly, and I just joined about 15 minutes ago your session, and from your conversation I understand that Pakistan is only responsible for only 1% of carbon emissions in the atmosphere, and we are facing a lot of issues according to these disasters and environment change and global warming and melting of glaciers, particularly in Gilgit-Baltistan. And as you know that second largest fresh water source is in Gilgit-Baltistan is glacier, the big glaciers in Gilgit-Baltistan, and we are on a very threat for this. And if we see that recently flood, the calculation of government of Pakistan is about the damages, collector damages, according to the government calculation, it is about $60 billion. And it will be impact on Pakistan every year. If we see in 2010, there was also a flood, and in 2022, there is another flood. The intensity of the flood is the same, but we are due to this changing environment and global warming, we will be going to face these issues future, mostly every year, hopefully. But my question is this, that if we see the government of Pakistan capacity and capability on the other side, we have still lack basic education and health facilities and infrastructure in most of the rural area. And if we considering all these things, it is possible for government of Pakistan to tackle all these issues. First question is this, and second one is how can we give awareness? This is the basic questions. We are organizing such good conferences, seminars in Islamabad or the capitals of Pakistan cities. But what about when you go to the basic area where people are facing this situation, how it is possible to give awareness to the people of Pakistan, those areas who are basically facing these issues, who are getting damages? So what would be the strategy from your side, and how can about this data collection? There is big questions in the Pakistan. You can't get exact data everywhere.
Thank you.
If someone already mentioned that in 2005.
Thank you so much.
The earthquake happened.
Do you want
then,
any particular panelist to respond?
Anyone of the
Okay, so
panelists.
anyone
Thank you.
from our esteemed panelists, if you would like to respond. Yes, Afizal.
So the question was too long, but the answer is very short. Yes, I totally agree with him on question number one. Pakistan can't do it on its own. We require the other, the other partners to come through. multilaterals, bilaterals, all of those have to be taken on board and take them along. And I think this conference played a major role in bringing them together. Secondly, about the awareness, this session has created that awareness. I am considering myself much more educated, still not there, but at least to a bare minimum level where, the consciousness about what requires to be done is very much there. And the expectation is that people like yourselves will go and educate people further down the road. The problem right now, by the way, Pakistan's problem is not the money alone. In fact, to my mind, and this is a theory, the money is a secondary issue. The primary issue is the awareness piece and the piece of actually going out in the market and helping people out on the field. And that's why we rolled out this program called BOP Madadgar. We have 13,000 employees. We wanted them to go in the field and help people out, create that awareness, and take things on from there.
Thank you so much, Zafar sir. Yes, please.
A question I want to provoke one of the distinguished persons sitting here, General Askar Nawaz, former chairman and DMA. So while all of us, we are talking of disaster risk financing and what can be done, I'm extremely actually inclined to get your views from demand side. So you have headed that organization. So what is it that organizations like Bank of Punjab or the private financing that we are talking about, how can we strengthen NDMA or the public sector organizations working on disaster risk mitigation?
Thank you, Dr. Saab, as always. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it was a very informed discussion, and I can see set faces over here with whom we have worked. I'd just like to present to you an equation. Pakistan's National Flood Protection Plan 4 that we made after the floods of 2010. I think its financial volume is closer to 3,000 billions or plus. So it's little over $2 billion US. Now have a look what loss that we had to suffer because of these unprecedented rain-induced floods. It's much higher than that. Had we invested that much money on this flood protection plan, so this is a classical example of if you invest on this disaster risk reduction, you can calculate what is your return on your investment, how much could you have saved, how much lives could you have saved. Now, the Paris climate change in its clause regarding the finances talks of innovative financing measures. And as Dr. Saab said, so that we are looking toward the IFIs and we're looking outward that we're going to receive the funds or have the funding from the outside sources coming to the vulnerable countries. When you go to the COP, every country present its case like a country which is affected by the climate change challenges, or it's vulnerable to that. So we are one of them. This sort of a funding may not be coming in times. So we also have to look inward. How do we generate this fund? Like we have the ADPs of all the provinces. At my time while I was there, I kept pursuing this idea that a certain percentage of ADP must be kept in a pool for the DRR or of course the climate change adaptation measures. It can be 1% or 2%. And imagine that it is done at the federal level and also at the level of all the provincial governments. So you can make a central pool and generate that sort of money. Similarly, here the president of Bank of Punjab, I think very good intervention by them, what they are doing. Now I present that National Flood Protection Plan has a lot of components. Consider it as a menu which is available, and we look forward towards the private sector to come and pick one part of it and finance it. That would in fact alleviate the concerns of generating the financing at the level of the government. And being an engineer, I can tell you, when you plan a project like you are constructing a road, so in the PC1 document, you have got a column that does this road affect how many people? Maybe, it can serve 10 villages and it can serve around 1,000 households. So if you can make and come forward and invest on these projects, I can assure you that this sort of financing by your side will help saving lives. It will benefit the communities in a manner that, like what we have seen, they'll be safe from the devastation. And of course, it will generate maybe a small investment, but it can generate a lot of money to address these concerns. Another aspect that Mr. Hassan talked of, I had started that multi-hazard vulnerability risk assessment initiative in 2016 because I learned it from Sendai that it is one of the best practices worldwide. And until unless you have a data, a reliable data, you can't do what Madam over here were talking of the risk insurance and all these things and what I was planning that we need to carry out. Until unless we have a data, we do not know what is our need. And while we started off this initiative, we did it for 5 districts, most vulnerable districts. I found out that acquisition of the reliable data, even from the government sources or through the field visit, it was a great challenge. But we need to do that. You have seen in this COVID environment that we have NCOC. It used to work on that artificial intelligence and the availability of data. So if we have this database, it will act as an enabler of our true need. And we would be very, very smart in our planning and in our response. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Yes, so yes, please. Okay.
My name is Dr. Mohammed Salim, former member Competition Commission of Pakistan. I have joined later, but there was a very good discussion from the panelist. And one thing which I observed, because I physically visited many areas which flood have destructed a lot. There's a need of, there are multiple actually institutions at the different provincial and federal levels. They are helping out the people and even the NGOs, but there's no coordinated and collaborated efforts. And this is the overlapping I have observed that needs to be centralized or at least in a collaborated way that will be done. I think that will be more resultful. And second thing which I feel is data sharing is another issue, which we are either we don't have reliable data with us or the agencies do not want to share that one. These two areas, if are being addressed properly, the most of the money, I think, being wasted due to not properly coordinated effort. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. We'll take one last question from the audience. It's right at the back.
Excuse me. My name is Mohammad Alashan. I'm a graduate from Quaid-e-Azam University in the field of environmental sciences. My question to the panel is that the most of the people in Pakistan are below poverty line, and especially most of the farmers. So if climate risk insurance or disaster risk insurance is made available to them, would they be able to afford those? Because they can't even afford basic necessities like food and clean water. So how would they able to afford the insurance? Thank you.
उसमें बहुत अच्छा हमारे पास एक मॉडल है टर्की का. टर्की इज वेरी प्रोन टू अर्थक्वेक्स. वहाँ बिल्कुल यही सिचुएशन थी कि इंश्योरेंस पेनिट्रेशन वाज वेरी लो, और जब भी अर्थक्वेक आते थे हाउसिंग का बहुत डैमेज होता था, पब्लिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर का भी और प्राइवेट हाउसिंग का भी. एंड द गवर्नमेंट ऑब्वियसली बिकॉज ऑफ लो इंश्योरेंस पेनिट्रेशन हैड टू स्टेप इन एज इंश्योरर ऑफ द लास्ट रिजॉर्ट and pay the compensation. As a result of this, frequent earthquakes, उन्होंने एक mandatory pool बना दिया, TCIP, Turkish Catastrophe Insurance Pool, because of which जहाँ पे affordability का सवाल, main सवाल यही है at the end of the day, they made it mandatory that within the certain metropolis, सारे जितने भी घर आते हैं, they have to buy mandatory insurance, क्योंकि insurance is a game of large numbers. The larger the pool, the more affordable the cost will be. And as a result of that, every house had to buy insurance. और वो उन्होंने enforcement कैसे की? आपको phone का connection, आपको gas का connection, आपको बिजली का connection नहीं मिल सकता जब तक आप insurance का proof ना दिखाएं. और insurance बहुत सस्ती होगी. As a result of that, about 10-12 million houses in Turkey are now insured. और इसकी enforcement का ये तरीका, अभी तक हम टीवी का वो दे रहे हैं, टीवी फी जब हमारा बिजली का बिल आता है 35 रुपीस होती है, तो इस तरह 30-40 रुपए तक इंश्योरेंस कॉस्ट आ सकती है, provided it is made mandatory, because otherwise the risk of anti-selection and moral hazard will be there. देखिए करने को सब कुछ हो सकता है, the political will has to be there. Thank you.
Would you like to add something?
We actually wanted to add something on the DRF as well, just taking up from there. लेकिन आपने जिस तरह भी खैर इंश्योरेंस की बात की, another element is जो आपका BISP program है, I think that's also under discussion at some level, कि perhaps proceeds from that, जो उसकी beneficiaries को जा रहे हैं पैसे, amount of that can also cover insurance. Bank is actually, we're trying to pilot something in Sindh. We are looking at the insurance of the productive poor. तो ये COVID में ये issue आया था कि people were unemployed, daily wages were not able to earn anything. So if you can cover those people, through insurance, uske liye we're trying to do some actuarial analysis these days. Isko kis tarah aage leke chale. On the DRF, ma'am, I just wanted to add, aapne baat ki कि DRF strategy ban rahi hai with NDRMF. Just a couple of recommendations. I hope that from the platform of this conference can be taken up. Ek to ye, there's a need for key institutions such as the Ministry of Finance to lead these initiatives, especially the DRF strategy. Uski wajah hai. Uski wajah ye hai कि the DRF strategy needs to be based upon very solid data, coming back to data, and looking at the sort of, we need to qualify the fiscal risks and need to understand what is the contingent liability on the government's budget of this disaster. 2014-15 में World Bank ने exercise की थी with NDMA, Ministry of Finance. We looked at the average annual expected loss from floods and earthquakes, looked at the maximum probable loss. Now we need to update that, and the government needs to understand. क्योंकि जब तक ये figures इसमें dollar term या rupee term में नहीं आएगा, the key decision makers who are sitting in the Ministry of Finance will not be able to understand the gravity of the problem. One-off disasters अभी आ गए हैं, floods, a $30 billion damage and loss figure, but 6 months down the road, will that urgency remain there? So we need to constantly provide this information. एक बार ये data आएगा, then the strategy can be formulated. And again, why Ministry of Finance or maybe the PMO needs to lead an effort such as this, because the strategy needs to answer 3 very important questions. Who to protect? So whether it's your certain segments of the population, whether it's your infrastructure, your economic assets, agriculture sector, what to protect them against? That's an easy answer, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's any particular type of disaster. And finally, how to protect them. So that how is very important, because that takes you to what sort of mixture of DRF instruments you need to sort of put in place, whether it's insurance, whether it's your reserve funds, whether it's international countries ke saath aapka contingent credits hai, and each instrument has an opportunity cost. Each instrument has a cost associated to it. So the basic idea is kya, you take the one with the least opportunity cost, your cheapest instrument for any disaster that occurs frequently, but has a low impact. Like localized floods ho gayi, so you obviously go for the cheapest instrument for that. But for any disaster such as these floods or massive earthquake, then you can tap into the international markets and you can look at instruments which have a higher cost. So just wanted to add that on the DRF, and I hope that the DRF strategy will take this into account moving forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your useful suggestions. And I think with this, before I hand over for the concluding and remarks by Zafar Saab, I would just like to extend my deepest gratitude and thank you to all the panelists, all the audience who has been sitting, sir, who have been enriched us with your experience and remarks. And it's been a really great discussion. And I would like to now give a floor to Zafar Saab for concluding. And
thank you, Dr. Aslam. I must thank the panelists, even the audience, General Saab, Dr. Saab. At least the 4 or 5 events, the conference events that I attended, there seemed to be a list of 10, 12 very concrete, doable action plan has come out here. And I'm just gonna go over that very quickly because I don't want to stand between my comments and the lunch which is waiting for you. So I'll go over very quickly and then we can firm it up later on by getting in touch with all these recommendations which have come through. By the way, you've been a great audience. All is jam-packed. I'm extremely pleased to see that, Dr. Saab, and the credit goes to you and your team. But you have been very engaged as well, and that makes a lot of difference. So thank you very much to the entire audience. Starting out with what General Asghar Nawaz mentioned. I hope मैं आपका नाम सही ले रहा हूँ, General Saab. And then it linked into what Dr. Salim mentioned. मैंने आपका नाम सही लिया है, Dr. Salim mentioned. The better coordination is required at the provincial and the federal level, and different components out there in terms of assessing the needs. Awais Malik Saab यहाँ तशरीफ रखते हैं, Ministry of Finance Department से Punjab. Awais Saab can take this as a takeaway, where it's very important that better coordination is required. And what General Asghar Nawaz mentioned, that in the budgetary allocation there is an element of assessment of the economic assessment. You'll be very pleased to know that State Bank of Pakistan has already come out with ECRM framework, which is Environmental and Social Risk Management Framework, in which now the banks will also be doing the same thing. So it's starting from 3 years from now, it will also be done. The problem there, General Saab, is that the people who are assessing all of that, they don't have any expertise. I'm very sorry to say, Planning Commission, आप डॉक्टर साहब थे ना, सलीम साहब, आप Planning Commission में थे ना? Competition. Planning Commission में कोई capacity नहीं है to assess these. वो बिल्कुल number filling exercise होती है. And if we continue to do that, it will be a useless exercise. So it's very important that the skill set is developed, and that's why I'm resorting on people like Dr. Tehseen and Ms. Nasreen, Rashid here. Their expertise will help us and train our people, and perhaps we can do some kind of a workshop with the SDPI as a follow-up from here, whereby these experts can educate us bankers on how we're going to do that. And I'll be very happy to take a lead with Pakistan Banks Association, with State Bank of Pakistan on that one. The other one is Dr. Suleri mentioned. We are under IMF program, and under IMF program we require an adjuster. And in COVID there was an 800 billion rupee adjuster which was granted to us. I'm pretty sure that adjuster will come through here as well in case of floods as well. But specifically what Dr. Suleri mentioned was the rapid finance instruments of IMF, whereby they extended $1.4 billion to us in COVID, and we expect that a similar help will come through this time also. We all remember, this is our second recommendation to the government, that we need to actively engage with IMF and get that done. The third one is related to, and we've all seen it, I'm just reiterating it, is related to the, debt service suspension initiative, whereby, the $3.7 billion debt suspension was granted to Government of Pakistan. in 2020. Perhaps a similar model can be followed this time around also. Number 4, and this is coming from an earlier session that we had yesterday, in which Dr. Aisha Ghaus Pasha was there. We need to have, and I'm very pleased to know that Karanda has already taken the lead on this one. We need to have a specialized green financing institution, so that they have the expertise, they can take it better ahead. And one of the DFIs that we have 6 or 7 DFIs, perhaps they are the ones who need to work on those, developing those expertise and become a specialized green financing DFI. The number 5 recommendation is related to some fiscal benefits are required. This is again a graduation from an earlier plenary we had with Tariq Bajwa Sahab as the chief guest, where he is looking forward to getting specific sort of requirements on the fiscal side for marginal projects, not the existing projects, but for marginal projects. Then number 6 is related to what Madam Rashid talked about, is the element of subsidy for agriculture insurance and the disaster related to that. Dr. Saiba, you mentioned about the Turkish example. The difference between Turkish example and our example is that Turkey, the cities can afford that and they are the most vulnerable. In our case, it's unfortunately the other way around. The people who can't afford it, and that's what gentleman's question was, they can't perhaps afford it at all, not even the bare minimum, let alone bijli, pani, wo to gas unko waise nahi milti. So therefore, my recommendation would be, and you are the expert on this, perhaps you can comment better, that we should put this kind of requirement of insurance in the cities which are not vulnerable, make it mandatory on them to be used as a pool for those vulnerable areas, because otherwise they will never be able to afford it. Government will not have the fiscal space to do it. So therefore, that is number 6 recommendation. Number 7 is related to what Dr. Ahad mentioned, related to microfinancing structure needs to be put in, and that has to be put in a very robust fashion. We have taken a lead. This whole initiative that you saw in Sindh, there was an element of microfinancing there, but we did that through our CSR activity. Perhaps we need to graduate out of that, and we require more of a robust framework to do this microfinancing at a larger scale. Uske baghair, I don't think that we will be able to make a headway. So on that one, we are already preparing a paper, Dr. Sir, and we'll share it with you. We're going to present it to the University of Cambridge. There's a group there who are working with us on this one. And perhaps that would be a good starting point where some NGOs are coming through. UN is also may come through and put in money as a pool, which will be used as a microfinancing on subsidized rate. Number 8 is related to what Dr. Sanjay mentioned, is related to, and very importantly, I think Dr. Dasin also mentioned about it. It's the sectors which require to be insured, and there's some kind of regulatory measures and actions required on those areas. So ICT, social, which is housing, hospitals, schools, energy, transport, and water. All these areas require some kind of regulatory action. To some extent, Naseem Sahiba ne already hame Q de diya hai through the Turkish model. Maybe that could be replicated for these all, for those vulnerable areas. So that is from Dr. Sanjay's recommendation. The next one, which is number 9, comes from Dr. Tehseen, is related to the better coordination between the stakeholders. Dr. Tehseen suggested Ministry of Finance to take a lead. I would suggest that it's not just Ministry of Finance, there may be a State Bank of Pakistan, because the financing piece involved there. State Bank of Pakistan and SACP working under them shall take a lead, because Ministry of Finance will also be looking towards these institutions. So somehow if State Bank of Pakistan and SACP takes the lead, I think that will be a much more useful and robust structure. आप भी फरमा रही थी नसीम साहबा, वो 18th amendment के बाद जो complications है ना, वो अगर State Bank आ जाएगा तो वो that complication will be taken care of very well, because that is squarely the domain of State Bank of Pakistan. Then Mr. Pereira, as I said, he made the day. We'll work with Mr. Pereira on coming out with a model whereby we can raise funding externally. Much needed requirement. Dr. Saab, we've been talking about it throughout the conference, the external account constraints. And last but not the least, the recommendation which has come from Dr. Saab on Dr. Ahad was the microfinance one, and the other one was the social, the technology and data one, which actually ties in well with what General Saab mentioned and what Dr. Salim mentioned. So उन्हीं की recommendations. So we will have almost 10 recommendations जो मैंने अभी आपको पढ़ के बताई हैं. And then we will put that in a paper presentation form to you, Dr. Saab, and then we can take it to the relevant departments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Zafar Saab. I'll hand over back to Ahad, please.
So thank you, everyone. And thank you to all the panelists, also the people who joined us online. And I'll just request the panelists to stay back for the group photo. Thank you, everyone.